Yeah, Chris. So the reason I'm going so deep again on that is I got involved in these acquisitions. We rolled a lot of them up. And I always wondered, like, you know, when I left the corporate world, I always felt like having the knowledge of someone who's been through that process and whatever that fee is going to be. And I don't, want to get into your fees because I'm sure they're different based on business size, but there's so much value there, right? Because little tweaks in someone's business, like changing their gross margin by 3 percentage points, or, you know, I hate to say right sizing their headcount, but kind of, right? Like if they're bloated on staff or sometimes understaffed, right? Hey, we're buying this asset, but it's supposed to produce at a certain level, and you don't have enough salespeople, and they're going to ding you for all that stuff. And so I think bringing on someone's knowledge like you guys that has that could be really valuable. And I was looking at doing that myself at one point. So when you guys come on and someone does come to you for these one-offs, is that something that you guys then are you're doing it as a one-off, but you're fully walking them through the transaction? Then it sounds like, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll basically take over the negotiations, get our client ready for due diligence, potentially reach out to some other bidders just to keep the first bidder honest,
Right.
and then really manage that whole process through closing, right? The due diligence process, the negotiations on the purchase agreement, um, and so we'll do that on those one-off deals. So that's one is probably a third of our business, or folks that for whatever reason, hey, this particular deal caught their fancy and they want to go execute it. We have another third where the business owner has just gotten to the point where they want to go to market. They want to go
Right.
sell their business. And so they hire us to run a process where you put a book together, you reach out to multiple bidders, you're managing that process, and then obviously managing, their management meetings with these investors, and then the letters of intent, and then finally through the due diligence and closing. And then we have another third of our business that's growing, which is these are business owners that have said, I'd like to transition in a year, 2 years, 5 years, whatever that time period is. And I just want to put my plan together. I want to do what I can today to optimize the results. And to your point before, Ken, there's a lot of leverage that you can get on the value of a business if you have enough time and enough runway to go execute. We
Right.
think about, the value of a business is really what are the future cash flows of that business at one level? How fast is the business going to grow and generate more cash? And how risky are those cash flows? How much risk is there in the business? And so what we do for those businesses is really just focus on how do we strip perceived risk out of the business, and how do we make their growth plans just a lot more credible so that investors will give them credit for it. And that one of the things that we've learned in that second scenario, when we run a normal process, right? Somebody's just come to us. The top bid is usually maybe a 20% premium to the median bid, which is usually around fair market value. So the process works at generating good premiums. The businesses that choose the third path, where they're actually preparing, managing risk, building a more credible growth plan, and then going to market, those premiums are about a 40% premium.
Yeah, I was gonna say
And,
it's got to be huge because I mean there's a number of factors. Not only is their own business more sound, but you guys have eyes and ears to the ground longer, right? There's like a longer
oh, for sure.
relationship. So they're getting better. There's a longer relationship. And even if they're not looking right now, it's like you're going to have that peripheral vision all the time because you've got this client that even if it's a year out, it's like, ooh, wait a minute, I think I have something that might be good. So yeah, it's just more exposure, I think, to the right people.
Yeah, you get a chance to really learn the market,
Yeah.
get to talk to potential bidders. The other thing that it does, we've estimated that between our team and our client's team, there's about 1,500 to 2,000 hours of work that's required to get a business ready to go to market. So putting the story together, getting the diligence materials put together, scrubbing the diligence materials, identifying the bidders, figuring out who to reach out to, all that. And in that second scenario, right, where somebody's just going to market, you're getting that work done in a pretty compressed period of time, 2 to 3 months. In the situation where somebody's doing that preparation well in advance, you can spread that same 1,500 to 2,000 hours out over maybe a year or 2 years.
Hmm.
And that just, it's a lot less distracting, and it's a lot easier to manage, and it's a lot smoother process than trying to cram all that work in. Because Ken, a lot of times what can happen is, if that, if you think about when the business owner is going to get distracted, it's, at the start of that process and as they're going through getting all these materials ready. Well, in most businesses, if the leader's distracted, you don't necessarily see the impact right away, but in about 3 or 4 months, you're likely to see the business degradation. And that usually is happening right when you're in due diligence with the buyer. And
Right.
there's nothing that will kill or degrade the value of a deal faster than declining performance of the business during due diligence. And
Yeah.
so
In the heart of
there's
it.
just a lot of, yeah, there's just a lot of benefits to starting early, being thoughtful, addressing those risks that show up, really honing your growth plan. I think most entrepreneurs have good intuition around where growth is going to come from. But if you were asked them to prove to a professional investor that their growth plan is credible, most of them would have a really, really hard time doing that. And that's, part of our job is to translate what they know intuitively into something that's going to be believable to the investment community.
Yeah. The other thing that I've noticed is we were pretty lenient with forward looking projections if there was proof that it could sustain, like kind of to your point. So, in other words, if someone said, we've got this great idea around adding XYZ service to our business, we'll be like, that sounds really good. What have you done in that so far? Oh, well, nothing, but we know it's there. They'll always be like, we know it's there. We know our customer base wants it. We've surveyed X amount of people. And it's like, yeah, but there's no revenue, right? And if there was even 6 months of revenue, we could get a run rate out of that and go, well, yeah, we can see it. You did 80,000 in the first month and 100 grand in the second month and 110 in the third month. And we can now start to annualize that. And right now we might be able to call that a $1.5 million a year stream of revenue, but you don't get to do that if you just walk in to sell your business and go, I just want out. You don't get to talk about all your great ideas that haven't
No.
happened yet.
Well, and to the point that you just made, a lot of entrepreneurs, yeah, they do. They have a lot of really, really good ideas. And also to your point, if they haven't demonstrated that they can be successful executing on those ideas, they're going to get zero credit for it.
Right.
Versus, hey, if they've had the chance to go start executing on those and demonstrate that that market exists and demonstrate that they can be successful selling that product or service, much easier, to your point, of giving them credit for that. And that's, again, what we see over and over and over again, is that for a lot of these entrepreneurs, again, if they had to present their growth plan on their own, um, I think they would lose a lot of value with a buyer because it's just not believable yet. They
Right.
haven't gone through the steps of shoring up all the different key assumptions. And that's a lot of work that we do with those clients ahead of time, is how do we, make sure that, um, hey, when you're presenting this growth plan, people are going to believe it, and it's going to be easy for them to believe it, right? They're not having to make any leaps of logic.
Do you guys focus on particular industries, or do you just focus on the candidate, or not candidates, but the clients themselves that come to you? Or do you guys look at it and
Yes
go,
and
"Hey,
yes.
there's a lot of consolidation in the plumbing services world, like let's go after plumbers or whatever." I mean, like how do you guys approach the market?
Yeah, I mean, almost all of our business comes to us through referrals. And at being in Colorado, we end up with a fair amount of consumer products, food and beverage,
Hmm.
hard goods. We also end up with a fair amount of SaaS businesses to represent. And then, we do business all around the country. We've closed probably 40% of our deals outside of Colorado. And so your standard mid-market manufacturing, distribution services, those businesses we do, for us, to be honest, it's a lot more about the entrepreneur and whether we're going to enjoy working with them than it is about the business. We've certainly left some big deals on the table because we thought the entrepreneur would be really difficult to work with and not much fun. And we've taken some smaller deals where we just thought, I really like that person and would love to spend the next year working with them.
What's a
And
small
it
deal
served
for
us
you
really
guys?
well.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Probably
What is
10 to
the range of
15
the deals?
million. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, 10
Yeah.
to 15.
So on the small end, probably 10 to 15 million. We closed a deal a little while ago for 475 million, which is a pretty good bookend. And our average deal size is about 75 million.
Are you guys dealing mostly with private equity, or are you dealing sometimes with publicly traded corporations, or what does that look like?
For our buyers, it's about 50-50 between what we call financial buyers or private equity firms and strategic buyers. That would be somebody in or around the actual industry that's an operating company that's buying the business. And so, and that ratio has started to equalize more recently as interest rates have gone up because private equity firms can't bid as aggressively with lower amounts of leverage and higher interest rates. And so, whereas before, I mean, 2 years ago, I would say private equity firms were winning 3/4 of the deals that we took to market. That's starting to, again, get to 50-50 again.
Just because they're tightening on the money they can put out there?
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure. Yep.
Um, is there a difference in, well, I guess the market just dictates it then, like you're saying. I mean, right now, private equity is having to back off. When private equity was stronger, are the multiples, were the multiples higher at that time, or have they generally stayed similar?
Um, what we have seen with this environment, as well as when in the last recession, the financial crisis, as well as in the dot-com era, um, there's generally a flight to quality. So if your business is a high quality business, right, great management team, predictable cash flows, your valuation is not likely to have taken much of a hit at all. If your business is less than stellar, you're likely to take a hit. And we've certainly seen that in this market.
Mm-hmm.
Valuations, I would say valuations for maybe less attractive businesses have come down 20 or 30%. Valuations for high quality business have actually stayed pretty robust.
That's funny that you say that. I feel like that's playing out in the stock market. I mean, if you look at it,
For
right?
sure. For
Like
sure.
if you've got a hole, if you got a leaky bucket, like nobody's forgiving about that right now, you know?
Right.
And just the appearance of seeming like you've got your expenses under control. Look at Facebook, for example, that I think bottomed at $90 a share, and they're probably around 230 now or something, while laying people off. Which is kind of a weird mixed message, but I think it was just a street going, okay, well, maybe there's value here again, right? And I just think nobody wants to be holding the bag on unprofitable companies right now. But it's been one of the strangest. I mean, and you probably see it big time from your chair. It's one of the strangest economic times that I've ever seen. The whole COVID to post COVID, because I'm no expert to call something a recession or not a recession. There's certainly, in my mind, parts of the economy that you can't say are not in a recession, right? Like they've had a
For
retraction of,
sure.
right. But then there's other parts that have grown through it. It's such a industry specific. When you look at things like consumer goods, when you look at things like hospitality, when you look at things like business services, these businesses are thriving. And when you look at tech and some other industries, obviously they are in full blown recession and have been for, I think, well over 12 months now. Are you seeing that from where you're at?
Absolutely. There's pockets of the economy that are doing really well. I think COVID, I mean, introduced a lot of variables that I don't think anybody could have accounted for. And the businesses that had done exceedingly well during COVID, I think are starting to see that that growth slow down or reverse. And likewise, the businesses that got hammered during COVID seem to be picking up much better.
Yeah.
It wasn't that long ago when any business that we took to market, you had to have your COVID story figured out. You had to tell the story of why, if the business did poorly, why the business performance was going to improve after COVID, or if the business did exceedingly well, is that performance going to
Yeah. Do you
continue
do,
or was that a
yeah.
spike?
Do you
Yeah.
deserve the
We
valuation? I noticed something during COVID and just at like a small level, but I thought it was really cool. And I think I talked about it like a year ago on here. But you know, we moved to New York. We're the only idiots that moved into New York City at the beginning of the pandemic, right? So like June of 2020, we moved here and of course it was a ghost town. It was really weird. And then New York City, like a lot of other cities, started saying, hey, restaurants, you can have outdoor dining. And so in New York, they just took full advantage and started like building patios on the sidewalk and taking up half the street. And it was really kind of cool though. It had a vibe like when you're in Europe or something like that. But for some people, and the government, sanctioned this, right? Like not only did they say it was okay, but they also, of course, there were PPE loans and different grants you could get and all kinds of things. So I remember being here just a short period of time, and it was just getting to the point where like you could eat, but only outside at a restaurant. But we just, you remember that time frame where it was like, I don't care,
Oh yeah.
we gotta go do something. Like we gotta get out of the house. So we're in
Yep.
the East Village of New York and walking around, and it's kind of cool in a way. It's kind of quaint. These things are opening up, and people are starting to get out, and everyone's got face masks on, but they're waving and stuff, and you'd see like shuttered store, and then a guy with like a 4 table restaurant that now has a 25 table restaurant, and he's not paying rent on the other 21 tables. You know what I mean? And
Right. Right.
to me, it was just a reminder. I remember walking there that night with my wife because we were going through some stuff with our business, and it was just a reminder to me that like there's an old Tony Robbins saying where he says, it's never a lack of resources, it's a lack of resourcefulness. And I was just thinking that
For
as I'm
sure.
walking around here, and I'm like, there are guys and girls making a mint off of this, and I don't mean in a sleazy way. I mean in a, hey, these are the cards I'm dealt with. What can I do, right? And I thought it was just such a good lesson because I was thinking about, there were certain people that hung their "I'm closed" thing before the rules of the new game were even announced. You know what I mean? They were just like, I'm out. I'm
I'm
out.
out. Yeah.
Yeah, I can't compete. And then right next to him, guy's got 25 tables and he's taking your customers. It's crazy.
No, I mean, we saw just countless examples of what I would call true entrepreneurship,
Yeah.
where, hey, you got a bad deal, you got a bad hand, you deal with it and you
Yep.
go figure out something new and you go to innovate. We had one of our clients that was basically their business was making chemicals to help clean meat processing plants where
Okay.
I don't know if you remember back in the day, but you couldn't get hand sanitizer and you couldn't find it anywhere. And so
Yep.
they just started making these gallon buckets of or jars of hand sanitizer and selling them. We had another client that was, they had done a lot of importing and were able to, get their hands on about 3 million masks. I mean, it was just everywhere we turned, we saw examples of what you were just describing, Ken, about how these entrepreneurs they figured out a way.
Yeah.
And, it's interesting of all the clients that we had, we didn't have anybody go out of business. I do think the loan program and just their resilience and perseverance got them through that. And some of those businesses just did exceedingly well. One of our clients that sold right after COVID was in the real estate training. So for real estate agents, training and development and continuing education, company called the CE Shop. And they just crushed it during COVID, as you might expect, because it was all online training. And uh they ended up selling and did phenomenally well. So it's, you know, obviously no one can predict the future. I think what COVID taught us was number one, just how fragile life can be and fragile business can be. Things can turn on a dime, but that importance of what you just described of being resourceful
Mhm.
and understanding and identifying, hey, we've got to pivot, we've got to do something different here so that we can, keep people employed and keep our business going. When during COVID, I had a project I was interviewing. I wanted to interview 100+ business owners that we had exited. I got through about 30 before business started to pick back up and I ran out of time. But what was interesting when I go back through those notes, there were two or three really common themes across all those entrepreneurs. One of them was, I just couldn't fail. I couldn't fail, whether they had friends and family money or whether they had all of their money, sometimes both tied up in this business. There just wasn't an option that they weren't going to be successful. And the second one was just how perseverant they were in the
Mm-hmm.
face of long odds or big problems. They figured it out. And there were a lot of dark days for a lot of those entrepreneurs. I mean, several near death experiences for their company, but they ground their way through it. And like I said, I just give them such credit. And again, I don't know that a lot of people get a chance to see that, right? They don't get
Right.
a chance to see just how hard it is to be an entrepreneur at times.
Yeah, I mean everything's out there, everything to lose. And like you said, I mean sometimes they're working 20 years to all of a sudden be an overnight success, right? What people don't see is that someone putting payroll
Mm.
on a credit card to get through for that
Right.
time frame or whatever it might be. What do you see? Because I feel like you have such a unique perspective, not only because of your background prior to what you're doing, but in what you're doing, you get to see so many different industries and you're seeing private equity and you're, paying attention to the markets. Do you have, not trying to put you too on the spot, but I mean, I guess just what are your thoughts about this economy? Like, where does it go next, in your opinion? Do you think we're approaching out of the woods or do you think there's more pain to come?
I suspect there's probably some more pain to come, particularly anything kind of around commercial real estate. My guess is that there's still few more shoes to drop there.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but it has been, and I think this has been predicted by a lot of the economists, fairly mild for most businesses. The folks that we deal with, we're not really hearing the same type of concern or revenue compression that we've seen in other recessions. And so, hey, hopefully we kind of get our way through this. I'm a little concerned about the U.S. consumer because, the government, I think rightly, subsidized a lot of spending.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously the economy needed it at that point and businesses needed it at that point. That cash savings is now working its way down.
Mm-hmm.
You're starting to see more credit card defaults. And so in the United States and elsewhere, the US consumer is what drives the economy. And if that starts to get more stressed, then I think we could be in for some more challenges. Although I just did see a stat this morning, we subscribe to a lot of research, and done they have a way that they can measure the level of stress on the consumer, and that stress was coming down just in terms of inflation. And so, hopefully that helps the Fed get more comfortable with holding rates and hopefully it decreasing them at some point. I think I had read that the consensus expectation was that they probably would start to reduce rates in 6 to 9 months, which, hopefully that allows us to, have what the proverbial soft landing. But I mean, again, and maybe this is part of the lessons of COVID. I just don't see a lot of businesses rolling over. I see them all just, yep, here's whatever the environment we're in. This is the environment that we're in, and we're going to go execute and we're going to make this work.
Yeah, I think I'm with you on that. I think the ones that sometimes were gonna fail have failed, right? The guy that wanted to hang the sign on his
Yep,
pizza shop hung it already, right, so to speak. Um,
exactly.
and I think I'm with you. I do feel like there's still pent up demand when it comes to investing in a way. I think there's a lot of money on the sidelines because I know I'm not the only one that feels that way. Like I have a toe in the markets, but certainly not the whole foot. And part of that is, very industry specific or seeing battered regional banks or something and going, okay, maybe that's a good area to be in, or, tech when it completely got slaughtered might be a good entry point. So I'm kind of picking my spots, but I guess, the markets always try to react in advance to what they think is coming. So my feel, and I know the Fed, I don't want to say the poor Fed because everybody seems to hate the Fed. I think the Fed's got such, it's such a
Oh my
tightrope that they
gosh.
got to walk. I mean, just in the little tiniest thing that Jerome Powell could say can affect everything, right? So it's like you could say something like, okay, well, we're going to pause interest rates and I don't see them going up for the foreseeable future. And maybe they come down at the end of the year. Boom, stock market goes up 800 points, right? But if he says something like, we're going to stop now, but there might be more tightening by the end of the summer, it's like you can send everything back out down into a spiral. So it's crazy. But I
Well,
do
and
feel
there,
like, yeah, I do feel like if we can kind of get out where we are, it's almost like as an economy, we kind of dodged a pretty close bullet there. I mean, and listen, if someone's in tech and they're sitting at home laid off, I'm not saying that didn't hurt, but I'm just saying
yeah,
holistically, it hasn't impacted as deeply as it could have.
I would agree with that. And I think the issues at the tech companies that had to do the layoffs probably had less to do with the economy than overhiring.
Totally,
When they were, I mean, it was crazy
totally.
in terms of how much hiring they were doing. And I think they all figured out, hey, we're definitely overstaffed. But yeah, look, I think the Fed's business, it's not just the interest rate management, it's the expectations management that they have to
Yes,
do. And so to your point, people are dissecting Powell's language, and he's had a tough job to figure out how do I start to get this inflation right, more under control without completely torpedoing the economy. And so far, I think they've done a reasonably good job. It's going to be, I do think that they should let some time elapse to let
agreed.
these rates kind of mature in terms of their impact on the economy. And my guess is that we'll see inflation come down, and I don't know that it'll get down to 2% again, but
I agree. I mean, everything's
hopefully.
such a lagging indicator when it comes to inflation itself is a lagging indicator, right? I mean,
Right.
it's what we're seeing now is not in. I mean, we might already be at 3%
Right.
inflation, but we don't know it because that won't come out until like the July or August or September report. So and by then, if
Exactly.
you institute another rate hike or two, maybe you really torpedo the economy by the fall, and I think that's what people are worried about. At the same time, if they don't do it enough, you're going to rise it back up to 7 or 8% pretty quick. It's going to whipsaw very quickly. But yeah, I love talking with people like you with a background, and again, you've got this seat where you're able to see multiple industries at the same time. And we have a little bit of that. Our main business is talent acquisition, so I knew people during post COVID that were $150,000 a year people getting $250,000 a year offers and are now being told report to an office 2 states away from where you live because they're saying that instead of we're gonna lay you off, right? It's
Fire
like
you. Yeah.
return to work really means like we're gonna go through some natural attrition. I mean, to me, that's the big return to work statement usually.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was just at lunch with a guy who's very active here in Denver in real estate, and we were debating work from home and what's going to happen and how's that going to relate to the office market here in Colorado, at least. And you are seeing the big tech companies calling people back.
Right.
Hey, we want you to be in the office at least 3 days or 4 days. And my guess is as they do that, more and more companies will follow. And I do think for a lot of downtowns, I mean, Denver certainly this way. I mean, they got decimated when people were working from home. All
Sure.
those businesses, retail, restaurants, everything else. And so having people come back to work, I think will be very helpful for those downtowns, to hopefully recover a little bit. And I know for at least for our business, you know, we we we've got a really really tight culture that thrives on that collaboration and being together, and so we've been very fortunate that most people want to come back and participate. And I've got kids that are in New York and California that are working, and my advice to them is always, hey, be in the office because that's where you're going to learn. That's where you're going to get the informal conversations and
Yeah.
the feedback and the interesting projects and everything else. I mean, I can't I can't imagine trying to develop as a young person today, without having that mentorship that's readily available. You're not going to get that on Zoom.
No, you're not going to get mentored from your living room, at least not to the same degree.
Uh-uh.
And also proximity is power to your point. The ability to see the look on someone's face and their body language and how they're carrying themselves and everything else is a big thing. So I'm a big fan actually of of being together more. But at the same time, I do think if COVID proved nothing else, it was that people, most people, not all, most, can also be productive sometimes at home, right?
For
So I
sure.
think there's this ability to me have the both the best of both worlds in many cases where it's like, okay, hey, we're gonna have an office, but also like, hey, you got a kid's baseball game at four
For
o'clock on
sure.
a Friday and you want to avoid traffic, just go work the afternoon at your home office. Like who cares, you know? And I think where that was taboo with a lot of companies before, it doesn't need to be anymore, you know?
I totally agree. I think it's allowed us, I mean, certainly our firm, right, just to be a lot more flexible. And we've always been, I learned this from my dad, which is, hey, it doesn't matter to me what hours you work. I just want to make sure that you get done what you need to get done.
Right.
And we've always been pretty flexible, and this has allowed us to be flexible as well. I just think that, especially if you're leading an organization and you want to make sure that you are kind of building and enhancing culture, very, very difficult to do that, right? If folks aren't together and having that interaction and that idea generation and exchange and learning and everything else.
Yeah, trust me, because my whole team is remote and it's mainly because I got people overseas. And it's a challenge. Like we have to do, if they were here, I would definitely get everybody together. But I just took a trip to South Africa just because I've got to be in a room with people sometimes, you know, and I've got
Yep,
7 team members down there. So, hey, I really
totally get
appreciate
it.
it. So good to meet you, Chris, and impressive background. And I'm glad we got to spend a few minutes because I wanted to pick your brain on the economy and kind of what's going on there. So thank you so much for that. I know it was a little bit off topic, but I loved it. Um, Thanks again. And we're going to put all the ways to reach you in the show notes.
For
Anything
sure.
else you'd like to add that we didn't get to talk about today?
No, really, thanks for having me on, Ken, and thanks for doing what you're doing and helping to educate all those entrepreneurs out there. We all need them to be successful.
Absolutely, sir. Thank you so much, Chris. Take care.
You bet. Take care.
All right, bye bye.